Hi, it's Dennis Daly. I've driven across the U.S. several times, and one of my colleagues from the old UPI radio network not only drove much of the country, he did so in a huge rental truck. Bill Clough was originally from Texas, but we worked together in D.C. At one point, he decided to move his remaining items, which were in storage in Amarillo, to Washington, and he rented a huge truck to do it. And he took us along to show us the ins and outs of moving.
Bill, before you left Amarillo, we were talking, and I know you contacted a lot of different rental companies, and there are a lot of them out there, finally deciding on Ryder. After you contacted them and made arrangements to pick up the truck, what kind of information were you provided? I know that you're no stranger to driving large trucks around. I've never driven one myself, but I know you had moved prior to that. What kinds of things did the rental agency let you know at first? And what should people think about if they've never driven a big truck like that before?
Well, of course, the first thing you have to realize is how big it is. You're not driving a Volkswagen.
I know. I would be absolutely terrified. I mean, I've driven Volkswagen vans and that kind of vehicle. But what went through your mind, and what do you think first-time renters who've never gotten into anything larger than a car should really keep in mind before they start out?
You have to tie everything down. The one box that you think that you haven't strapped down with clothesline wire or bungee cords or something is the one that you're going to find scattered all over the end. You can't believe what going across the United States can do to what you've packed back there unless it is so tight you can't move it, because there are there are good springs back there and good shock absorbers, but it bounces, and it's just phenomenal what damage can be done that you wouldn't expect. The other thing in learning to drive is you must, as in any large vehicle, you have to steer by your rear wheels. Now, I don't mean when you turn the steering wheel that the rear wheels are turning, but I mean when you decide to turn around a corner. You've got to go way out on the street and turn right, because it's those wheels way back there in the next county have to clear that corner.
Well, you see that a lot on semis. It says this vehicle makes wide turns, because if you didn't do that, you'd clip the pole on the corner.
And there's no difference, really, between driving a Volkswagen van and one of those large trucks. The whole difference is just how much space there is between you and the rear wheels, but you still have to be aware of the rear wheels. And, as I said, learning how to pack it, and you just tie it down. If anything moves, try again, because I'll guarantee you it will. And the other thing that a lot of people make a mistake, if it's the first time they've done it, is that this isn't a Volkswagen and you're not going to get 30 miles per gallon. You're going to be lucky if you get 5 or 6. And that changes how you plan your whole trip, because literally every time you see a gas station or a truck stop, you better think about fueling it.
Well, one of the things you were mulling about in the beginning was whether or not you were going to get a diesel or a gasoline truck. Now, which did you finally end up with, and what was your reasoning there?
I wanted diesel because the fuel efficiency is so much better, but at least at Ryder, the diesels are only available in certain lengths of truck. And I needed a bigger truck, and so I ended up having to get the gasoline model. So, yes, my gas cost went way up from what I wanted.
So the first 2 lessons would be basically buy enough cord and realize you're going to spend more money on gas or fuel in general if you've only been used to driving a car.
And, of course, if you travel in summer, you don't have to use the air conditioner. And you'd be amazed how across the United States how much difference that makes when you turn that on. Sometimes at the heat of the day I just had to, but I could tell the difference.
On this week's American Montage, we are essentially debriefing UPI Radio's Bill Clough, who recently moved his belongings from storage in Amarillo, Texas to Washington, D.C. in a truck across the country, and we'll be hearing some of the interviews he did and some of the people he talked to. Bill had an interesting experience recently of moving his belongings, which had been in storage in Amarillo, Texas, to his new apartment out here in Washington, D.C., and Bill is going to share some of the things he learned so that maybe when you get ready to move, whether it's across town or across the country, some of the things Bill learned about moving from the folks at Ryder Trucks he can share with you. Bill, I understand that when you picked up the truck, the fellow, of course, he knew you were recording this, but spent a lot of time with you talking about a variety of things, and you have a little bit of that interview.
Well, this man named Gary Green, who met me at the airport, and as is true with all Ryder dealers, when you rent a truck, the first thing they do is they inspect the entire truck and they write down on the form. So if there are any scratches, dents, whatever, you're not responsible for them. They say, now you see this dent, I'm writing this down here. And of course what they do then is, in the event there's anything that's not on that means it happened while you had it, so therefore you're responsible for it. And then it's almost like learning how to fly. They give you a complete checkout of where everything is on the truck, and that's exactly what this gentleman did when I moved.
As far as the body goes, you can see a lower dent on the driver's side, right along the box. Matter of fact, I'm going to need to note that on your contract. Okay. You want to be sure to secure before you leave. Secure down your door. Okay. And be sure your ramp is locked in. Okay. I saw U-Haul driving down the road with their ramp just dragging. So I don't think there's too much left of it when they got there. As far as passenger side, there again, very little damage. The step's intact. All the tires and wheels are good. Just for if you ever need to know, your batteries are inside here, and it does run off unleaded fuel, which is on your passenger side right here. Okay. Okay, as far as mirrors go, windows, the hood, everything's intact. Okay. Decide to check the oil along the way, which we'd recommend every time you stop, go ahead and check it. I'll show you where that's at real quick. Unlatch this. You got these two, you got a latch on both sides. This hood doesn't weigh very much at all. And when you go to check your oil, right here. Okay, it's real easy to get to. I've gone through it already. Everything looks good in the truck. Okay, everything's full. All your fluids are full. Okay. Lock this down here real. Okay. Your lights are all in order. Everything works on your clearance. If you ever question your clearance, like you were talking about earlier, you look out your mirror and just listen. However, this one's not backwards like when you were talking about. Okay, so you need 11 foot 10 inches to clear. Better. Yeah, just say 12 feet. Generally, you don't have to worry about that on the highway anyway. It's the sides, little town side streets. Keep it on. They'll be posted on each one of your bridges.
Now, the dents you were talking about, was that one?
Yeah, this one right here. We're going to list that on your contract, just so they don't give you in trouble when you get there. By the way, if they do, have them give me a call if they have any questions, okay? Now, inside, you might want to note, there is no park in these, okay? When you stop and you want to shut it down, put it in neutral, and then the yellow knob to the right of the column, that's your parking brake. Pull it, that'll set it. Push in, disengage. Don't ever use that while you're running, while it's driving.
You'll come to a sudden stop, I imagine.
Yeah, never go while you're mobile. Let's see, other than that, we discussed the weight station deal. You don't keep any kind of logs. Main thing is to get there safe. Top it off with fuel, okay, before you drop it off. And other than that, that's really about it. If you got your paperwork, I'll make note of this.
Okay.
The damage. And I like to get in there, too, before you go.
Sure.
So I have to clean this up in there. It's a little slippery right now, so I want to go in there and I want to clean up the floor. It looks good, but it's still a little slippery, so I'd rather get that up.
Bill, the neat thing about this whole thing is the guy swore up and down that he wasn't giving you preferential treatment just because you were doing a radio show. But when you come to think about it, if you own a company and you're entrusting somebody with one of your trucks, you're not just going to throw the keys at them and say, here, take it.
It was pristine, too, by the way.
Really?
I mean, you could have eaten off the floorboards.
Well, now, you were talking about what you should and should not do. I know you have some comments here from the guy at the rental agency explaining what the biggest mistakes people make are.
The biggest mistake, I would think guessing the size truck that they need themselves. I think they need to take a minute, think about what they're doing, and call somebody. Call us. Call anyone that's been in the moving business and kind of talk to them about what they have. Because in the past, I've seen it where they've rented the truck, and it's better to have too much truck than not enough. And that's the big thing. Is they want to get the right size truck. They need to go through everything and find exactly how much money they're going to be spending, so there's no surprises.
Boy, Bill, and I'll tell you, that's one thing that could really mess up your move if you don't ask all the right questions. We are talking to UPI Radio's Bill Clough, who recently got in one of those big rental trucks and drove it across the U.S. from Amarillo, Texas to Washington, D.C., and we're playing some of the comments he recorded along the way. He's going to take us on the road, kind of a diary in sound, if you will, of his move across the United States. Bill, you have been playing some tapes you made, and I think you have another cut here from the gentleman at Ryder Truck. You were asking him a lot of questions, and he was showing a lot of concern about actually teaching people to drive, if I'm not mistaken.
I was going to tell you, yes, this is on the road again, but believe me, Charles Kuralt never did it this way.
Not in a rental truck. What was it, a Winnebago, I think? You know, one of his old vans is preserved at the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn. I want to get up there sometime, but that's another story.
Yeah. It wasn't bright yellow.
So more, if you will, on your trek.
Well, you know, this isn't the first time I've done this. I've gone across the United States 3 times in a rental truck. It's not an acquired taste. You do get used to it, but it's kind of neat in a way. You know, you're the king of the road. I did a story one time years ago in Colorado where I drove with a 18-wheel driver all the way to Las Vegas, and I found out the lure of these things. He let me drive this thing for 50 miles. And when you're when you're in a truck that big, nobody bothers you. But the neat thing about it, and the safety thing about it, is that you're so high in the cab you can see over the car, so you can see down the road to see what's coming. You're not. It always bothers me when I'm driving a regular car and I pull up next to a truck and all I can see are the lug nuts on the wheels because you can't see what's coming in front. And I like to see what's down the road a couple of miles.
Well, I've driven in one of those. I guess it's called a Suburban up in Wyoming, and you almost feel you need a ladder to get into it.
Well, the Suburban is somebody said was a station wagon on steroids.
At least. Well, anyway, you have some comments here from a fellow named Gary, and I think you were, as we interrupted ourselves for the break, asking him about driving different kinds of trucks.
Do you find that some people get pretty ambitious and maybe they've never driven anything but a Volkswagen Beetle and suddenly they're driving a 24-foot diesel truck? It takes some adjustment, I would think.
Oh, it does. It does. Matter of fact, I've had them come in here completely either shook up or really excited. However, they've never been in one. But, you know, if it takes it, we can put them in the truck and drive them around and let them get used to it as far as making the corners and stopping, you know, what it takes to stop, how much room they need. You know, but yeah, I've taken people and actually, when we had the standard transmission, taken them out in the parking lot, got them used to driving the standard transmission.
Well, I'll tell you something about standard transmissions. I'm old enough to remember a time, Bill, when in driver's ed, they purposely taught you to drive a standard transmission. Of course, that's like those stories I had to walk 6 miles to school.
Well, this one was an automatic transmission, and frankly, I loved it.
Do you, in a truck that big, though, let's give some advice for people. I guess with standard transmissions so much more available, unless a person really likes the feel of a manual transmission, why get one?
Well, of course, the transmission is getting bigger and tougher, and I think it's done for the customer. It takes a lot of double clutching and so forth to work a manual transmission, and then you might have a person who's driven an automatic transmission car all their life, and suddenly, an automatic car all their life, and suddenly they're expected to stick shift in a 24-foot, 7-ton truck, and that could be a bit
depressing.
Depressing. Yes.
Right before we break again, we have just a minute. Let me go back to one thing you said at the beginning before we get on the road here. And that's this thing about tying everything down. I mean, I don't want to beat this to death. It would seem like an elemental kind of thing, but boy, you know, if you really don't take that message to heart, you're going to end up with a lot of broken dishes.
Plastic clothesline. Plastic clothesline will absolutely tie everything down. You have to get yards and yards and yards of it, and if it moves, tie it down. It's the same reason of a person having a seat belt in a car. Why do you strap yourself in? So you don't move around while the vehicle is moving, and it's the same thing back there. But there's a lot of potholes and a lot of ruts on the highways as you go along, and you can't avoid all of them. And when those rear wheels hit a pothole, everything in that truck is going to jump 2 or 3 feet and come back down again, and the whole truck's going to go up that way. Well, 2 or 3 feet's a little exaggerated, but it feels like it. But the cargo shifts a great deal. And after a while, you learn when you pack these things, and they give you guidebooks to show you how to do this too. You have to have lots of blankets, lots and lots and lots of packing blankets, and then lots and lots and yards of the plastic clothesline in order to absolutely strap down anything that moves.
Yeah, I think it would be a temptation to think because it's in any kind of big truck, it's going to be secure. I wouldn't want to ride in the back of those, no matter which brand, which company, or how big the shock absorbers are.
Well, I've done it on slow speeds. I haven't in town. I never did it on the highway. But you ignore this advice at your peril and at your property's peril.
And so UPI Radio's Bill Clough heads off for a cross-country trek. Bill has been here in Washington, D.C. for a couple of years, but had a lot of his belongings still in storage in Amarillo, Texas. And so he went to one of the truck rental companies and rented one of their mini big rigs, I guess. Bill, we are now to the point where we're going to hear some of your comments as you drove that truck eastward across the country. For the most part, you were on the interstate highways, right?
Absolutely, because I had to get there in a hurry. You always have these dreams. I'd love to go back on the blue highways or something and do that, but you don't realize how that slows you down.
We should explain it. Am I right in saying someone wrote a book called Blue Highways, based upon the fact that a lot of the little county roads and state highways are blue on maps? They're not major roads.
Yeah, I want to get a four-wheel and just do the dotted roads.
Wouldn't that be fun? And also, as you drove across the country, you had the opportunity to listen to some local radio stations.
Good morning. You're on Tradio.
Yes, I have a I have a 1980 model Datsun King cab and a 1981 Datsun King cab.
Well, this isn't a 1981 Datsun King cab. We're in the middle of a 20-foot rider truck. We're, let's see, what was the last line marker? Marker 100 on the interstate, eastbound, heading for Washington. It takes a bit of learning to drive something this big, but it's easier than you'd think. I'm sitting here in air-conditioned comfort. The steering wheel is powered. It's not too rough, except you can tell that this interstate's had a lot of trucks this size and a lot larger that have been going over it for years, so it's a little bit smoother in the left lane than the right. It's almost a clear sky, and it does remind me that somebody once said, I think it was Charles Perrault, said that the interstate system allows you to go clear across the United States and not see any of it. But here in these wide flatlands with corn on one side and barley in the next field and wheat in another, there's a lot to see. It's just that it doesn't jump out at you. You kind of have to look for it. But with this many miles to go to Washington, there's not a whole lot left to do, but look at the countryside and see how the harvest is doing this.
Bill, one thing about driving across the country like that, I think the joy of listening to small-town radio is such fun because both of our hearts are not in urban America. I mean, your favorite little town is Estes Park, Colorado. I'm from Washington, Indiana. And as much as I love the sound of slick, urban, big city radio, there's something great fun about those little stations out there, some of them carrying this program right now, who still do the obituaries when somebody dies. I mean, that is radio, and that would be part of the fun, I think, of driving across the U.S.
Well, there's something about country and western music and truck driving, or driving in a car, too. But and I don't mean that you're playing like you're a cowboy, but especially in the panhandle of Texas, which is cowboy and cattle country anyway, I find it the type of music that I most like to drive by. I'll listen to country and western on the radio for 8 hours, whereas I won't necessarily listen to that long on my home stereo.
Being without you has turned out to be so inconvenient.
There's just something about country and western music and driving on the road. There's also something inextricably linked between country music and driving a truck. This isn't supposed to be a social commentary, but there's something neat about being able to listen to that music while you're high in a cab on the flatlands of the Midwest, with the horizon interspersed only by irrigation machinery, windmills, an occasional gate, or gate post, I guess I should say, and grain elevators. And someone, I don't know who said this, but someone once called them quite appropriately that they were the cathedrals of the prairie.
I've had to take time to find somebody new, but I'm not too sure that I'm still over.
Bill, did you have pretty good weather for most of that? Driving's bad enough in a car when you get bad weather. Was most of it pretty good?
Oh, it was excellent all the way through. There was no problem at all. I'll tell you something, though, about that. If you're driving in snow, you'll find out that a truck has a lot more weight, and it'll go a lot of places that a car won't in snow, which just means that it allows you to get stuck in places that are much more difficult to get it out than a car.
Well, of course, this time of year, there's not going to be much worry about that. But, there again, I mean, a truck is the same as a car. You got to make sure you got the windshield wipers checked and all the washer fluids and all the summertime things. No overheating, I suppose. But you said you took it pretty easy.
Well, they have governors on them. You're not going to go above 65 even if you wanted to, because it's held that. Plus, another case is if you try to go too fast, you go faster than that, your gas mileage is going to plummet down to nothing.
When you're driving down the highway, there's not a lot to do except think. And, of course, to mind your driving. You think too much and you get yourself in trouble, I guess. But I talked earlier about some of the things that dominated the landscape on the Midlands out here. Nothing dominates the skyline. The sky dominates over everything. It's just occasionally punctuated by a couple of things. Windmills, like we said. Power lines are another. I find it's kind of fascinating if you can to kind of keep a collection, a mental collection of various patterns. I guess that's the photographer coming out. Trees, little clumps of humanity where farmers or homesteads originally built their houses, and the first thing they did besides building the house was plant the trees as a windbreak. And of course, long after the homestead is gone, the trees remain. And again, those grain elevators, the cathedrals of the prairies, they tell you where towns are. That and maybe a water tower. On these flatlands out here, you can spot a town 7, 8, 10, 12 miles away. There's one place I know on the stretch in New Mexico where you can see the town that's like 22 miles away. And then as you get closer to the town, they just seem to rise higher and higher on the horizon, sort of like a ship coming over the horizon. They become great landmarks.
They certainly do, Bill. I know my little hometown in Indiana, when I come down from the airport in Indianapolis, from the furthest distance, what I see is the water tower, and I know I'm home. UPI Radio's Bill Clough moved from, well, I'll demonstrate, over here in Amarillo to back here in Washington, D.C., and it was quite a trip. Bill has been taking us along via sound recording, sharing with us some of the sounds on the road as he went across the United States.
These flat horizons out here, there's a joke, at least there was in the panhandle of Texas where I grew up, that if you stood on the empty remains of a tobacco can, you could see 15 more miles. It's not as flat as some places. People who want to say the panhandle's flat should ought to try visiting Pecos, Texas. Now, that's really flat. But nonetheless, we were talking a while about that as soon as a homesteader placed roots here, literally, he'd plant trees. One of what some critics have called the first psychological Western was Giants in the Earth by Rolvog, and that's R-O with the 2 dots over it. The heroine of that book was Barrett, and they were both from Norway, I believe, or somewhere in Scandinavia. He came from a village where the houses and the town itself was very small. You had neighbors within elbow room and so forth. And she's transported to the wilds of the North Dakota, the flatlands out there, and the phrase that she keeps saying over and over is, "There's no place to hide." And I can imagine what it was like. I'm kind of doing a reverse journey here. I'm coming from these wide, vast lands where the Blanding said was a place where you can stretch your eyes, and returning back to the east where things are more confined.
Bill Clough, as you headed toward the east, I know you went across some major landmarks, and I think one of your favorites, and we'll hear your description in just a minute, is as you neared the mighty Mississippi, which even not necessarily mileage-wise, but psychological kind of marked your halfway point, the transition in a way between west and east.
Yeah. Once you cross the Mississippi, you're in the east. And all you have to do is see East St. Louis, and that will confirm every suspicion that you have.
Well, Dennis, we've been on the road for 2 days. Somebody, I don't know who, said that St. Louis was the gateway to the west. I think that claim might be contested by Fort Worth. But actually, I think we should look at that in the reverse. I've been driving through the west most of these 2 days. St. Louis, more properly, is a gateway to the east. As we're talking, we're just going past the famous arch, and then, of course, after that means we cross the mighty, and we'll see if it's muddy, Mississippi. We're on the bottom deck of a two-deck bridge. I can see a large three-span bridge ahead of me on the right. It says, we've just passed an exit. It says last Missouri exit. 55 miles an hour. The arch on my left catching the reflection of the setting sun. A very impressive power line pylon on the right. And there's the river with barge traffic in the middle heading north, while 4 lanes, 1, 2, 3, 4 lanes of traffic cross it overhead on the bridge. And there's the Mississippi, crossing with a speed limit of 50 miles an hour on this bridge, a bouncing bridge. Well, the bridge isn't bouncing, but the truck is. On my left, more barge traffic. Just a gambling boat, another excursion boat, the shadow of the arch going across the river. And we're in Illinois, and that means, as far as I'm concerned, we're in the east. Not home yet. Long way to go, but it's the start.
Dennis, just for you. I'd like to say, I wish I could tell you that I had driven miles out of my way, but unfortunately it was directly en route. But I did this just for you.
I had a second cousin that lived in St. Louis once. Went there to take up barbering. Barbering? Yes, sir. Had a 2-chair shop there for a while. Well, is he still in business up there? No, he gave that up on account of the deflation. Got himself a job trimming hedges. Trimming hedges, huh? Yeah, so his barber experience.
And to the humor of Lum and Abner, Dennis, just for you, we have just crossed into Indiana. I'm 2 miles into Indiana, and I don't see a whole lot of difference between Indiana and Illinois, other than we crossed the Wabash River to do it.
Floyd Elton. I thought you said it was Whitley.
Well, Bill Clough, you've come a long way from your start in Amarillo, Texas. You finally, I understand, bedded down for the night and had some thoughts about some of those original questions you'd asked the fellow when you picked up the truck.
I asked him what were some of the mistakes that people made when they rented trucks, and he mentioned that one of the common mistakes by people who've never driven trucks before is that they think these things make 30 miles per gallon. They don't. They make about 5.5 to 6 miles per gallon, and with a 5.5 miles per gallon average with a 35-gallon tank, you're going to be lucky if you make 200 miles between fueling. I'm averaging about $40 every time the truck stops. That's just physics. You're carrying a lot of weight, and therefore you use more gasoline. And that's one of the reasons that though these trucks are air-conditioned, except when I've absolutely had to have it, I drive with the windows open.
And, Bill, looking at the report you filed, you took the southern route. Sometimes I go up through the Pennsylvania Turnpike, but when you got to Washington, Pennsylvania, you headed south.
Dennis, we're only about 8 miles out of Charleston, West Virginia, and I have found heaven, the Diet Pepsi bottling plant.
Bill Clough is on the road this week on American Montage, moving his belongings in a rental truck, telling us what the experience is like. Right now, we've gotten him as far east as the hills and mountains of West Virginia.
Well, we're northbound out of Charleston on Interstate 79. There's quite a bit of fog on this last day, Dennis, which has slowed down our progress a bit, and the road's a little rough. The sun is just a pale disc. If I had binoculars, or if I dared use the binoculars while I'm driving, you could probably see the sun stops. This trip is almost done, and regardless of how convenient and how comfortable this truck is, I'm getting awfully tired of this truck. But it'll be there soon.
Bill Clough, you bring up an interesting point, and that's the fatigue factor. I'm not sure I would have wanted to have driven from Amarillo to Washington, D.C. by myself. Now, you didn't have a CB radio, not that that would have done you much good, but you were listening to the radio. I think that's one thing people should really consider when they look at a map of the U.S., that they are going to be driving slightly slower in a rental vehicle than in their car, and that they maybe should allow even an extra day.
They're quite comfortable. I don't want to give the impression they're not. It's just the responsibility of driving something that big, and even with power steering, it's bigger, and you're making more stops because of fuel, and you're having to just literally watch more things. So the result is that I found it fatiguing after a while, but I'm sure that would be true if I'd been driving in a Lincoln Continental. If you're on the road for 4 days, for 12 hours a day, you'd get tired of that thing after a while.
But pace yourself.
Well, I think...
Were you able to stay pretty much where you thought you were going to? We've only got a few seconds left here.
Yes, I'd planned it in advance, but again, see, this is the second time I'd done this, so I knew exactly where I was going to stay. One of the places that I fueled, and I can't remember, it was someplace in Oklahoma, my truck pulls up at the gas stand, Ryder, and another one pulled up the other way. And so I thought, well, this is too good to pass up, so I took the microphone out and decided to talk to a lady named Leanne and her 2 cats.
I'm traveling with my fiancé Eric and my 2 cats AJ and Cece from Maine to California.
All the way to California.
Right.
I don't know if you studied any history in school, but do you realize you're going to California on the same route that during the Dust Bowl days, all the people went to California with all their belongings?
No, I didn't realize that.
Well, I don't know what that means. It's just kind of repeating the situation.
I know, exactly. It's been quite a trip. We're hoping to get there tomorrow afternoon. So, it's been long.
Some of the camaraderie on the road. I know I mentioned CB earlier, Bill. It's too bad that it wasn't 20 years ago back when you could actually talk to people on CB quite a distance. I think that's one of the few things, though, that keeps the truck drivers sane, having somebody to talk to.
Yeah, the secret to CB now is if you can put up with the profanity you hear, is don't talk, just listen.
Well, and Bill, that's probably a whole other show we could do. Tell you what, we only have about 2.5 minutes left. For those who have joined us late and want to go over this again, let's talk about the very basic points. First of all, you get ready to rent your truck. You pick the company that you think is best for you. You get the best deal. If you would, as a person who's now done this a couple of times, go through the 3 or 4 main points, the main pitfalls, no matter how basic or sensible they may sound, that the first-time mover doing it themselves should really consider so they don't do it the wrong way.
Well, first, almost any of the companies will have a brochure. It gives you lots of pointers, including how to pack the truck. Of course, their little drawing never fits the material that you have. I don't know how to tell someone to pack a truck. I've packed the same material so many times, I know where everything goes and how to cram it in there.
But as you say, tie it down.
Tie it down, strap it down, cram it down where nothing wiggles. The slightest little vibration of something against something else exacerbated over the entire country, and you can wear through a table leg. And blankets, lots of blankets to cover things up.
Plan your route ahead of time and make sure you got money because you're going to use a lot more gas or diesel fuel than you estimated because you're used to driving a car.
Sure, and weather. You're going to do this in the middle of winter, either plan a lot more time or paid a lot of attention to the forecast. I did it in the summer because I knew I was going to be coming across the United States, and I didn't want to get caught in a Midwestern blizzard.
Well, I don't blame you there.
And
allow yourself enough time.
Yeah, and again, on the first day, the first few minutes, take lots of time to learn how to drive that truck, because if you take off the lot and turn it too sharp and put the side of the truck over a picket fence, that you've ruined your whole trip.
Certainly a bad way to start, and not a bad idea to take your camera or your camcorder or an audio cassette machine as you did and document it, and you'll have fun looking back on it later.
And padlocks. You have to supply your own padlocks. You're going to lock the truck up. Sometimes they have side doors, sometimes they have rear doors. You've got to supply it. Don't lose the keys.
Bill Clough, thanks a lot.
We all move a lot, and now Bill is back in Texas. I'm Dennis Staley.